So welcome everyone. Um, so today we're going to talk about oh, we're going to talk about assignment-based clustering, where the most famous one is k-means. And so before I get started, just some just to remind you, I'm not going to be here next week. I'm traveling to a workshop in Germany, so I have two lectures by some other people. The first person will be Mesam Alishai. He's currently a PhD student, but he was faculty before that. So he will talk to you about spectral clustering on Monday, and then next week, Wednesday, you'll get a lecture by by Dr. Elkindi Rezig, who will talk about choosing K and the number of clusterings. Okay, so the second homework is due today. Everyone finish it pretty good? Yeah, okay. There were a couple of concerned emails last night, but it seems like hopefully most people have turned it in. If not, you can turn it in up to 24 hours late. You lose only 10%, and up to 48 hours late, only 20% on the assignment. They're not a huge amount of grades, so you should still try and do that. And if you haven't finished everything yet, you also get to drop the lowest score, but only if you turn in all the assignments. I accept even later assignments for that to allow it to be dropped, but you have to turn everything in to be able to drop one. Okay. Other things, since what's due next week, Wednesday, a week from today, is the data collection report for your project. Okay, and what is in the data collection report? I won't be here next week to remind you all about it. So maybe it may sound well. So it will. It's not supposed to be very onerous, just to kind of keep you moving forward on the project tasks. About roughly 1 page each. You only need to turn in 1 per group, and it should just kind of progress to make sure you have collected some data already. A lot of you, for your project proposals, already have some identified so some data, which is great. Just talk about where you got it from, how you obtained it. Sometimes if you might be still obtaining it and be getting more, then you can talk about the plan for that. That's okay. Some projects could be a little bit more intensive in this. How large is your data? And here I don't want to really know the size of the file. What I'm looking for is like how many data points are in, how many dimensions. And this is for me to be able to give you potential feedback saying, for what you want to do, maybe your data size is not large enough, or it's probably way more than you need, and maybe you can do some sampling to kind of at least get started on that. Yeah. Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do with it, right? So, some people have done projects with dozens of data points, and it's been totally fine and clear. The structure was clear they were finding, and they were interesting, intricate data points. Other times, hundreds or thousands or millions or maybe billions of data points. It really depends on what you're focusing on. If you're focusing on the scalability of some approach, you should probably have pretty large data to demonstrate that. But if the analysis, you may not need as many data points. And so I want you to report it. There's not like a right or wrong answer, but I will try and give you feedback if it seems a poor match. Okay. Again, this is to kind of keep you along and me to give you kind of structured feedback. What format are you storing the data? This is not, I don't want to say, it's like a CSV file. That's not what I want. I want to know kind of how are you thinking about this as some abstract type? Is it a point set? Is everything a vector? Does Euclidean distance make sense to measure, or cosine distance? Is it you representing every data point as a set, like we talked with Jacquard? Or is it spatial data? What is the resolution? Or is it down to some region of the spatial data? These are the sort of things I want you to be kind of thinking about in this regard for the format. Okay, Do you need to process the original data again in a more easier compressed format? Some of you will need to do this. Sometimes it will be too big and you'll need to kind of compress it or sample it down or remove some dimensions which you think, or like you're downloading a movie data set and it has a bunch of analyzable characteristics, but it also has a long piece of like reviews of everyone who's reviewed it on IMDb before in text, and maybe you don't want to mess with that stuff. So you filter that out, right? So what sort of processing did you do on the data? I want you to think about this now. If you haven't kind of completed everything, it's not the end of the world, but I don't want you to kind of be making these decisions and maybe making these wrong decisions at a later time. Start thinking about them now and making progress on this. And then the last one is probably the most hardest to kind of really grasp what I'm asking here. How would you simulate similar data? And what I'm thinking about here is something we'll talk about later in the semester with like anomaly detection and outliers is that in order to really build these models, you need to have a baseline of what do you think the data should look like, a distribution that the data could be coming from. Say if you're drawing IAD samples from some distribution and that ended up with your data, what would that distribution look like? How would you model it, right? How would you think about saying this data is an outlier because it doesn't fit the distribution of how I would simulate the data? Or this region is anomalous in some way because it doesn't fit what I would think to simulate the data from. So that's why I want you to kind of think about there. This, it's a little tricky to maybe wrap your head around, and you should give it a try. Again, trying to force you to make progress on this without having seen all the techniques we'll do in class. So that's kind of the point of this. Again, no more than 1 page, so it should not be too long, just kind of a checkpoint. All right, any other kind of questions on this? Okay, good. I've also quietly posted the next homework assignment due in 2 weeks on clustering. It's not fully up yet, but is mostly here. There are 4 data sets. I think C3 we haven't posted yet, but it's almost ready. So the third data set is not yet linked. So if you can't find that yet, it's because we didn't put it online yet. But so I want to make it available so you have time to 2 weeks to get started on it. Don't wait till the last minute again. I know all of you love to do it the last couple days, but you should be able to get started. The first question was on hierarchical clustering, hierarchical agglomerative clustering. So you can start on that now because we talked about that on Monday. Second question will be on assignment-based clustering. After today's lecture, you should basically be able to do the second question here. We'll talk about kind of some different variants of these algorithms and how to compare them. And then I'll ask you what the number of clusters we'll again cover this the end of next week, and but it's a pretty open-ended question. So I kind of want your thoughts on this. And then there's also a bonus question. So you should be able to do most of this without get started on this now, and you have 2 weeks to do it. Okay, and I want you to plot everything. Again, if you remember the first algorithm, who remembers the first clustering algorithm we did in class? Before that, you plotted the data and you drew circles around the clusters that you thought were there, okay? So I'm going to tell you to plot the data. The first 2 data sets are in 2 dimensions. This one will be in like 50 dimensions, I think, C3. And this is in the bonus question. One will be in like 5 dimensions. So they'll be harder to plot. And you'll have to use the other mechanisms, right? But a lot of times, if you can plot it, you should do that and use that to kind of give your, draw a sense. If it doesn't match what you're seeing on the page, probably something's wrong with your algorithm. Okay, this sounds good. Okay, so you can all get started on that stuff whenever you're ready. Probably not till after the lecture today. Okay. See you, Mason. All right. Okay, so assignment-based clustering. Okay, so this is probably when people talk about clustering, this is probably what they mean 70% of the time is the assignment-based clustering. And the idea is we're going to, and this is similar to some concepts we talked about kind of some last time in class, but the idea is you have, remember, your input, right, is going to be your data X, right? And this is going to be in some space, and then you're going to have a distance D that's going to go from, this is going to be elements from some space. Let me call this M today, script M. Right, that's going to tell you how to measure how similar 2 points are. For some of today, this will work for any metric distance, and for sometimes this will have to be the Euclidean distance for the algorithm to work. Okay, and then we might be given a number k here, and so with assignment-based clustering, the output now is going to be a set S of sites or the centers of the cluster. S1, S2 up to Sk, right? So this will be a subset of M, and sometimes it'll be a subset of the actual data. Okay, so this will be a subset of size these sites. So in this case, with k equals 3, then we'll say that, say this is S1, this is S2, and this one is S3. Okay, and so these will define they will define the clusters just by reporting these centers or sites, right? So these are sometimes, I'll try and call them sites, sometimes they're called centers instead. Centers has a connotation to it, so, but it's often fairly generically used. Okay, so I want to find these representative points. Then there's going to be a mapping function, which is implicit. So given, so I can apply this mapping function phi of s, okay, and I can apply it on one of the data points, and this is going to be equal to arg min sj in the set S of the distance between sj and x. Okay, so this will be some fj star for the point x. This is going to, so how does this work? For any data point, any kind of data point x, let's say this particular point here, I'm going to find the closest site. So S3 for this point x, okay, if I measure the distance instead to S1 or S2, the closest one is S3, so this is going to be the assignment. So this is implicitly defining the subset clusters by just returning these sites. Yeah.
How are sites represented like this? Is it just a point?
Is just a point. Well, it depends on the metric space, right? So again, if the metric space is just Euclidean distance, it's RD, or in this case R2, it's two-dimensional points, then it has an X and a Y coordinates, right? And I just use those coordinates to represent the point. In other cases, I will not have a well-defined, an abstract space. I will need the sites to be elements of X, of my input. And so then I will represent it as one of the input points. I could, but sometimes that's not well defined. Like, let's say I'm using Jacquard distance. My objects are these k-grams, right? Sets of k-grams in these documents, and I've represented them as sets. And now the elements in my data are these sets, each representing a document or a genome, something like that. After I built the k-grams, my distance could be Jacquard distance. It's a well-defined metric. And now, how do I take the mean of a set of sets? Okay. There you can, for a metric space, you can always define what's called like like the point that minimizes the sum of the square distances or something to it. But like, you don't want to do that. You just want to represent it as one of the sets. So then you force it to be one of the sets. And so this will be one of the variations of this problem. Sometimes you let it be anything. Sometimes it has to be one of the inputs. And that usually, you choose that at the algorithm level, not necessarily at the formulation level. Yeah. Okay, but either way, once I've defined the set S, right? So when I've defined this kind of the set here, right? These 3 points, right? Then this implicitly defines which of the data points map to which of the clusters, right? So all the points, so then I can say that S uppercase Sj, which is going to be a subset, this will be the subset of X such that that phi of S of X is going to be equal to lowercase sj, the site. Okay, so I can define the clusters implicitly. So defined implicitly. Okay. And so and we talked about with the hierarchical agglomerative, one way of doing that was finding a representative point from each cluster, and then you merge them, you keep track of this thing. At the end, really what I want to do is I want to represent everything in the cluster with a representative point and put all the information I want just stored here. And then I don't have to go through and think about these the whole set. Maybe I don't even have to store all the data anymore. I just say these are the representatives that are kind of telling me what's kind of going on in the space. And so I'm skipping straight to that as my objective. This is my output, now the set of sites, and it implicitly defines the subsets that I want. Maybe I need these subsets, but I can go and recover them by computing this function. Okay. In fact, there's this nice connection to geometry with something called a Voronoi diagram. This is the Voronoi. I'm not going to dwell on this in this class, which is saying this is the space of all the points in the whole plane or in any metric space, which are closer to this site than any of the other sites. And so if a point lies in this cell, then it maps to this site. So we talked about that with respect to the nearest neighbor problem before. Now the nearest neighbor is over the set of sites, not the original data set. Okay. And this mapping function is just kind of realizing this, but I could compute it just by computing the distance to all the sites. So I don't need to actually build this. Okay, and you typically would not, sometimes visually useful to see them. All right. Okay, so this is assignment-based clustering, right? I'm just trying to find the set of sites. Okay, now this is the structure of the output. Now I have to say which, what is the actual, how do I define what's a good clustering now, right? So there are different variants of assignment-based clustering. Okay, and it depends on what I say is a good clustering, how I define, and I'm going to define these cost functions, cost of the clustering, and I want to minimize the cost. Okay, so I'm going to find a cost, and then the goal of the clustering or the formulation will be the set of sites which minimizes this cost. Okay, so the kind of the first most common formulation is called the k-means formulation, and this is where the cost, and we'll call this cost 2, okay, is going to take in a set X of points and a set of sites. Okay, and then the cost is going to be the sum over X and X, the distance between X and phi of S, okay, squared. Okay, and sometimes just to compare these, let's write, I'm going to normalize it. So now it's the average distance squared. And this is the distance from the point X to its closest site. Okay, so I could write the arg min inside this function, but I've just written this phi function. Remember, this phi function here, this mapping function is this arg, it's mapping X to the closest site. It's this distance here to the closest one. Okay, and so I'm just looking at, of all the points, I want to minimize the sum of the squared distances. Okay, and let me just highlight this squared term here. This is maybe a little bit, let me not use pink on pink. This may be a little bit unusual to see. Why am I minimizing the sum of the squared distances? Well, it turns out there's going to be a nice algorithm for it. This one will have Llyoyd's Llyoyd's algorithm, which will be a nice iterative algorithm or method for this that is from the 1950s, and it's designed specifically to optimize this cost function here. Okay, and this requires that the metric space that X is in this metric space is going to be equal to RD. Okay, this requires that, and the distance is between X and S is the Euclidean distance. That we're going to use the Euclidean distance here. Okay, so Llyoyd's algorithm requires this. You can get it to run on some other settings, like if everything is L2 normalized, it's on the sphere, you can pretty much get this to run, but we will assume it's Euclidean distance for this special algorithm. Okay, if you think that this choice of the squared term is strange, why are we minimizing the sum of the squared distances? You think that's strange? Well, then I have a treat for you. Okay, we can run k-median clustering, where this we'll call cost 1. And this is going to look pretty similar. X and X, the distance and now I'm not squaring this term. I'm not squaring the distance. Okay, I'm just minimizing the sum of the distances. Okay, so this one is maybe better with outliers. It's not as affected by them. So we'll see k-means algorithm. If you have one outlier, well, the cost of that becomes squared if it's very far away. So we'll kind of pull where the optimal centers are towards the outliers more dramatically, where this doesn't square, so it's not pulling it as dramatically towards the outliers. The algorithms for this are not great, okay? And this is the reason this is less popular. There is some, so not kind of great, not great algorithms for this one. There's saying there'll be a special step. If you haven't seen Llyoyd's algorithm before, there's kind of a clever step where you can take a mean of something. It's very natural. And the k-median does not have a corresponding thing. that is similar, where there's a nice closed form solution for having a good guess of where you should put the center. And so the algorithms for this are more tricky. And that's probably why this k-means formulations with the squared is so popular, because there's this nice formulation. Because there's this nice formulation, though, requires Euclidean distance to work, basically. K-median, if we're doing this, we don't require Euclidean distance. There isn't this nice algorithm. So there's a variant of this called k-mediod. Medioid. There's two I's in there. There are probably spelling mistakes out there, but k-medioid. This one is probably more popular than k-median in practice. And this has a cost 1. It's got the same cost function, right? It's exactly the same cost function, but I must have that S is a subset of the data. Okay. I restrict that my sites are subsets of the data. Then I call k-medioid. Because there's not a great algorithm, I kind of, instead of searching all possible sites, even in like Jacquard space, which seems really strange, I restrict to when the sites are subsets of the data. And that is this formulation. Okay, and so because I've given up on this nice algorithm, I'm then, to make the search space more manageable, I say I'm only going to consider the sites that are actual data points. And maybe this makes sense. Sometimes the metric space is that I only know how to define it on actual data. And so if you do this, you call it k-medioid instead. And so this is probably more popular than k-median in practice. In the theory and algorithms world, people study k-median all the time, but k-medioid is more common to actually use. The fourth one is k-center, and that's why I use sites instead of the word center. This would be a cost infinity. And see if you can guess what this cost function. If I write an L1 cost, I take the average of the distances. For the L2, I take the average of the distance squared. Maybe I could write a square root over there if I wanted to. What would an infinity cost be? Remember our LP distances? What was L infinity distance? Who remembers L infinity distance? Yep. Yeah, it's the max over all things I'm measuring. And this is the same thing here. No, it's the limit. So if I took this to be actually the square root, so this was to the power 1/2. And this was actually a p, and I take it to the pth root, and I took p to infinity. I'm eventually going to come to this max formulation, this distance x v of s. Okay, and what this one is doing is it is measuring the furthest assignment I have to ever make, right? So I go back here, I look at these assignments, look at all the points on their distance to the site. Which one is the furthest away out of all choices? That is what determines the cost. Okay, so this one is really susceptible to outliers, right? One outlier will really pull the cost up. So, this one has kind of, it will really be susceptible to outliers. There's a nice algorithm called the Gonzalez algorithm. Okay, and this is a really nice algorithm, but I think is kind of underused as kind of a nice way to start out your clustering. It has a lot of nice properties about it, as kind of a very first simple pass on how to find your clusterings. But it's susceptible to outliers by design. So maybe I actually want to make sure I identify all the outliers. Well, those are going to be actually the location of my sites. I'm going to tend to put the sites exactly at the outlier points. If they're out by themselves, it's kind of hard to split the difference between them. And so there's some kind of neat properties about this. It's hard to do exactly, but that's true for actually a lot of these. Yeah, these problems. So these are, I've mentioned algorithms, right? I said the name Llyoyd's algorithm, and I said Gonzalez algorithm, but these are formulations of the problem. I've not talked about any algorithms to solve any of these yet, right? And so k-means, notably, is not an algorithm. It's some people say, oh, the k-means algorithm, but what they mean is Llyoyd's algorithm typically. And as we'll see that you can do better than Llyoyd's algorithm, okay? Or just not use Llyoyd's algorithm by itself. You want to actually specify it more. These are formulations, and these tell you what you want to optimize. They tell you, given this data set, the optimal clustering will put the sites in certain particular spots, right? And what defines what is a good spot? Well, it depends on how I measure the cost. And if I choose a different way to measure the cost, I'll get different optimal solutions. Okay. Now probably if I'm looking at this data set and all I care about is the end up subsets at the end, any of the algorithms, any of the formulations will probably give me the same subsets because this is a nicely formed data set. This is well clusterable. It's not going to matter so much which I run. But you don't necessarily know that ahead of time. And so there are different advantages to these, especially with how they deal with outliers or what else you can say about them. Yeah. Yeah, right. If you run k-center and you find the optimal solution, probably the sites, some of the sites are probably going to be outliers, right? If there are going to be outliers. It's also really useful for what's called diversity maximization. You have a bunch of, so this is really heavily used on Google for their search engine, their front page. It tries to give you the first 10 answers it gives you. It tries to make sure they're not repeats of each other, that they're not pointing to a copy of the same web page. And they want a diverse set of web pages that's found in some space of all web pages, right? I'll build some metric space between how similar is the content on the web page, and it wants to make sure the front page has very different examples instead of 10 copies of the same recipe for apple pie that you're looking for. It wants to find you 10 different recipes for apple pie, or maybe it's referring to something other than a recipe. It's a song or something like that. So we'll try and fill up that with very diverse things. And the k-center solution is trying to find a set of sites which are representative and far away from all the other sites. Okay, and we'll kind of see why it forces the sites to be far away from each other as well. Yeah.
Would it be efficient?
Sometimes, yeah. This is one of the uses, and if you want to find anomalies and you trust your distance function, then this is a great thing to do. We can, yeah, what do you mean by anomalies and outliers and all this stuff? We'll get to this later in the semester, and we'll talk about how this sort of thing could be useful. The density-based clustering we talked about Monday could also be useful for this, because it's the points that aren't in a cluster are kind of the ones that are anomalous or outliers. Yeah, again, these are formulations, and they will tell you they will do perfectly fine on the 2 moons data set. They will give you the solution to this formulation for the 2 moons data set will be the optimal solution for the 2 moons data set under this formulation. Okay, this says this is the right way to define a cluster, and the 2 moons data set does not have well-defined clusters in that sense, because that way of defining clusters seems very strange to these formulations. Okay, so it's really your point of view, whether it's the data first or the formulation first, or how you want to think about it. But these are really trying to build, their clusters have to be defined by these Voronoi cells, right? They have to have these bisectors between them, and the separation between the clusters has to be cut off by the bisector. And that's true for any of these cost functions. This is the assignment-based clustering has this structure. Great, great. Okay, so let's start. So, and again, one other thing, these are not algorithms, these are formulations. Right. Okay, okay, good. Okay, this is kind of, you go out in the world and you say, oh, I'm going to run the k-means algorithm. People will know what you're talking about. That's a pet peeve of mine. Okay, okay, so sorry about that. Okay, okay, Gonzalez algorithm for k-center. Okay, let's talk about Gonzalez algorithm first. This is, I think, the cleanest, simplest algorithm to run here, and we'll kind of, if you haven't seen these before, we'll kind of get you a sense. Okay, again, you're given my input is going to be x, and this is going to be in some metric space, some distance, say distance d, and we're going to say that this is going to be a metric, okay? And I'm going to be given k. This is going to be the number of clusters. Okay, this will be my input here. And then I'll tell you the algorithm, and then we'll kind of simulate it on some data I'll draw, and then I'll tell you about what properties you can say about this. Okay, so Gonzalez. Okay, so it's what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a clustering in an iterative fashion. I'm going to build a set of sites in iterative fashion. Okay, so step 0, I'm going to say site 1 is going to be an element of X chosen arbitrarily. Okay, it's not really going to matter how I choose the first site. Okay, what you can say about how well the algorithm works does not depend on this choice. Okay, and so I'm going to say I'm going to have a set of sites S1, which is just going to be a single site, right? So if I ran this for k equals 1, I'm done. Okay, okay, but we're not going to run for k equals 1. This would be kind of silly. Okay, so now we're going to go and build the rest of the sites. Okay, so in general, I'm going to say that Sj is going to be site 1, site 2, up to site j for j in 1 up to k, right? So I could choose S1 is just one site, uppercase S2 will be just the first 2 sites. Okay, so I will need this and build this up progressively as I'm running the algorithm. Okay, so now I have a for loop for j equals 2 to k. Okay, then this is going to be the whole step of the algorithm. I'm going to set Sj, this jth site, to be the arg max of all x in my data set that maximizes the distance between x and phi of Sj minus 1 x. Okay, so this is the algorithm. Okay, I guess I'm going to return S equals Sk. Okay, so this is the whole algorithm. I picked the first point arbitrarily, then I loop through 2 through k, right? And I select the next site, and I pick it as the furthest point away from any of the existing sites I've already chosen. Okay, and so let me just run through a simulation of this. Okay, so I'm going to pick an arbitrary point. let's say pick this point here. I'll call this point S1. Okay, arbitrary point. Now I need to pick S2. Where's S2 going to be? Okay, tell me where to go. All the way down here, right? The furthest one away from S1. Okay, this will be point S2. It's the furthest point away from S1. Okay, now here's the part where people often get confused. Where's S3 going to be? Yeah, the furthest point from either of them, right? From the minimum of the two, right? So where's probably going to be here, the furthest point from S1, right? So S, this will be S3. It's further, I can map every point to the closest of S1 and S2. All these points are closer to S1 than they are to S2. All these points are close to S2. So they're in fact very close to S2. So I don't assign them to anything. S3 is far from S1 and from S2. So I chose it. Okay. They should stop here. Should we do another one? Makes sense. There are still some other groups up there. Where should S4 go? Probably depends where, which is closer. Maybe the bisector is through here, and maybe this point is the furthest, right? Maybe this is S4, because this point is closer to S1, and this point is far from S3 and from S1. So this would be S4. And then where should maybe S5 go? Probably in here someplace, right? Okay. Right, and if I stop here, now the assignment, right? The assignment I'm going to get, these Voronoi diagrams are going to tell me how to do this assignment. And basically, I drew the bisector between the closest set of things. Maybe there's some weird degeneracy almost going on here. But they typically don't meet in 4 points at once. But okay, but I've kind of grouped all the clumps onto each center, and this worked pretty well. Okay, if there was just one point down here by S2, if there wasn't a set of points, but just a single point down here, it still would have picked it, even though there wasn't a group down there, right? It always would have picked these points far away from everything else. Okay, the crucial point to remember here when you're remembering how to use this is that I'm measuring the distance to the set of centers I've already chosen. Okay, so this is the distance to the set of sites already chosen. And it's a greedy algorithm. Once I choose them, I have them in my sites, and I always keep them. Okay. If I was able to change them, I could probably do slightly better, right? I could probably, maybe the furthest point away between two is between S2 and this other one. So I moved S2 to be more central. It might minimize the furthest distance. I haven't really optimized this, right? So maybe I can do a little bit better by optimizing, but typically people just stop here. So this is Gonzalez's algorithm. Yeah. That is it should be a capital S. Yeah. It's a subscript capital S. So that's why it's the same size as this one. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, if you look in the notes, so I use C in the notes instead of sites instead of S, but it should be clear. Hopefully there. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So the next thing I was going to say is that solving this optimally is, it turns out to be, is NP hard. People have said, it's been proven to find the optimal solution to this is an NP hard problem. You have to search exponentially. I mean, unless P is equal to NP, you have to search exponentially many clusters to check which one is the optimal. So we can't solve this totally optimally, and this will not give an optimal solution, but it's always going to be good. It can't be too far away. It will always be at least a factor 2 within the distance to the optimal. All right. And so the argument for it is kind of, if you run this algorithm and you know the optimal solution, then you can argue that if there was a site that is further, like I can draw a ball of whatever the radius is to the closest point around each of the sites. Okay. And I can say if there was some assignment of sites which is better than it, it would have to be within that radius, right, for each of the sites themselves. And then its radius is maybe half the size or smaller. Okay, so then I have to be able to include, in this case, maybe there's a smaller ball that looks like this that is half of the radius of this ball that I'm drawing centered at S2, right? The green one is the one centered at S2, but maybe there's an orange one that is centered at some other mysterious point that's maybe not in the data set, which contains it, and that could shrink it by half. Okay, but if I shrunk it by more than half, then it could not include the 2 points that define the radius, right? There's no point that could be less than half to contain both of those 2 points. And that's kind of the meat of the argument. There's a few other tricky details. You have to say that globally this is true. But that's roughly why it's a factor 2 approximation. And in fact, if you're working in a general metric space, you cannot do better than a 2 approximation without, there's another form of hardness, EPX hardness, but it's basically hard to do better than a 2 approximation in a general metric space. In 2D, in Euclidean distance, you can get like a 1.7 approximation or something through a much more complicated algorithm that no one uses. Okay, so this is basically the right algorithm for the problem if you don't want to spend exponential time. And this works in any metric space, so it's a very powerful thing. It'll help identify outliers. It will give you a very diverse representation. And if the data is really well-defined, well-separated clusters, it will give you the same subsets as if you ran basically any other algorithm. Okay, it may not define the cost as optimally as if you optimize at the end, but the same subsets are going to be there. So if you want better representatives, you're better trying to optimize it a bit at the end. But if you just care about the clusters, this is pretty good. And if you're in a general metric space, it's really hard to optimize the choice of the sites afterwards anyways. In Euclidean space, you can kind of see on the drawing you can do better, right? But in general metric spaces like Jacquard space, there's not much else you can say. Okay. Yeah, let's say quickly, how long does this algorithm take to run? Right, so I have k, a for loop here of size k, so at least a factor k. And then inside the for loop, I have to find the maximum distance between x, and I have to compute the arg max to something else on up to k things here, right? For the second half of this loop, there are at least k over 2 things I have to do. So maybe there's a k squared term here. If I'm clever, I can do it. So if I do it naively, it's n times k squared, running time. But if I do it, if I'm a little bit clever, I can do it n times k. I only need to compare the distance of x. I keep the assignment to the same site, or I maybe update to the new site. So I only have to compare its current assignment to possibly one other thing. And that I can do in constant time per point. So if you look in the notes, you can see you can shave off a factor k off the naive algorithm by being a little bit careful about how you implement this. Okay. Yeah, I will ask, I think you asked to implement this, but again, if you want to use AI or existing implementation, as long as it gives you the right solution on the homework, you're welcome to do that. It's not hard to implement though. So, okay. Okay, so what if I wanted to optimize the location of the points at the center? Because this tends to give ones on the boundary of each of the clusters. Everyone is kind of on the boundary of the shape it contains. That's always going to kind of be the case. Okay, so this other way of approaching it, which is more popular, Llyoyd's algorithm, and this one is designed for the k-means objective. Okay, and this one will have as input x is going to be a subset of RD. Going to have the distance is going to be the Euclidean distance, okay, the L2 norm between the difference of 2 points, and I will also be given k, the number of clusters. Okay, so probably how many people think they've heard of Llyoyd's algorithm before? Maybe. Okay, and how many haven't? Maybe. Okay, good. We'll go through it. We're going to the Llyoyd's algorithm. So step zero is I'm going to choose, now I'm going to choose not one point, I'm going to choose k points arbitrarily. Okay, and I'm going to choose this subset S is going to be a subset of X. So the sites will be a subset of X. This will be my starting point, okay? So I already have k sites. I have these define A clustering already, but I'm going to optimize them. So I'm going to repeat 2 steps. 1A, I'm going to basically find for all x, I'm going to set the assignment arg min sj in the set S of, I guess this is Euclidean distance, x minus s, sj. Okay, so I'm going to actually compute this assignment function. Okay, so I'm going to check I have the right assignment, and it may have changed. I may not have it. So I'm not going to leave this as something implicit. I'm actually going to calculate this assignment, mapping every point to the nearest site. And then 1b, now this is kind of the important update part. So for all j in 1 through k, right, I'm going to set sj equals the average of all the x's such that phi of s of x equals sj. Okay, so now this is the kind of really important part here. I'm going to set all the sites to be the average of all the points that have been assigned to them. This, I can do this in high dimensions. I can do as the coordinate-wise average, right? So I take the average in each coordinate. That becomes the first coordinate. Same for the second, third, and so on. Okay, and I'm going to repeat this until S is unchanged. Right? If it keeps iterating, if I keep updating the sites, there's more improvement to be had here. So I'll do this until it's unchanged, or maybe I'll say for 20 iterations might be enough, right? Sometimes it might be moving a little bit for a long time, what the sites are. I'll say, I'm okay if it stops, if it's moving a small enough amount, or I reach 20 iterations. But we'll leave it here as I'll move it until it completely stops moving, and until I can't update anymore. That means when I recompute the assignments, none of the assignments change, and I can combinatorially check that. It's kind of, might be hard to kind of exactly check if the average is exactly what it was before, but this step I can really check. Yeah, okay. So let's before we talk about it, let me kind of run an example here. Okay, this is okay, let's say there are kind of 4 clusters you can see here. We're going to start with the sites as these input points here. Okay, and so the first thing I need to do is assign all the points onto the sites. And I can kind of do this by literally drawing the Voronoi diagram of the bisectors between these guys to figure out where the assignment goes. And the tricky part is over here. Okay, this is all the bisectors, right? So all these points are assigned to this site, this ones, these here, these down here. Okay, so then now I need to update them to the average, right? So this one, this site, this first site, S1, it moves to the center here. This kind of makes sense. The average of all the points it's assigned to is right in the middle of that cluster, which is great. Okay, this one moves to the middle of this half of the cluster, right? I'm gonna here, but the one here, well, this cluster is really spread out, so it's gonna move maybe here. Right, so this would be site 3, and then so this would be here, and this would be site 4. This would be site 4. Okay, so okay, is this going to be any better? Let's draw the Voronoi edges again. Site 1 and site 2 are divided by this purple line here. Site 3 and site 2, like this. And site 4 and site 1. Something like this, okay. Is this better? Let's see. Well, site 1 will stay in the same location. This is good. Site 2 is now going to get to move to the center of this cluster. Site 3, well, it's no longer has this as part of its assignment, so it's going to move down here. And site 4 is actually pretty much going to stay in the same spot. Okay, but then if I do this one more time, now I'm going to get site 2 and site 3 is here. Site 2 and site 1 will have this Voronoi split. These will be here. And okay, so what's going to happen now is site 3 will move a little bit closer here. These guys will stay in the same spot. And site 4 will move over here. And then I do one more iteration. Now, if I look at the Voronoi split here, it's going to assign stuff in the right way. Okay, and after this step, I will optimize where site 4 and site 3 are, and I'll get to kind of a somewhat stable location here. Okay, kind of make sense as I was running it? Okay, for those who hadn't seen this before, this kind of iteratively moving towards the center of the cluster and fixing the reassignment as it's going at the same time. So it's kind of this iterative, this two types of iteration you're balancing at once is kind of similar to like an EM type algorithm, which is a very powerful technique within machine learning and AI, where I have multiple things I know how to optimize both parts individually, but I don't know how to optimize them together. And by alternating between the two of them, I tend to do fairly well. And so this is not quite an EM algorithm technically, but it's kind of on the way there. And so this kind of alternating optimization of these two steps is a really powerful sort of idea to see here. Okay, great. So this was k-means clustering. I'm just repeating these two steps, figuring out the assignment, and then taking the average. Okay, and so a couple of things to say here. So first of all, let's look at this object here. Okay. Okay, so this average step is kind of the really important thing that makes this work. This works when x is in RD and the distance between x and s equals the Euclidean distance between x and s. Okay, so when I have the Euclidean distance, then this averaging step, this is going to, so let S uppercase J equals, let me actually call this X sub J. It's going to be the set of X in X such that phi of S of X equals Sj, right? So this is the set of points which are assigned to the Jth cluster here, right, that I did in the previous step. And so I want to, find S, which is going to be the arg min over all points S in RD, when I want to minimize S and Xj, the distance between X and Sj squared, right? I want to minimize the sum of the squared differences. Okay, this minimizing the point that minimizes the sum of the squared distances is going to turn out this is exactly the average of X in Xj. Okay, so this is taking the average is what minimizes the sum of the squared distances, not what's minimizing the sum of the distances, minimizing some of the squared distances here. Okay, and so this is confused people. At some point, there was someone in the government who said, I want to find the point in the US that minimizes the sum of the distances from all of the population where everyone lived based on the census in like the 1900s. And they said that point should be the average. So they computed the average and said, this is the point that minimized the sum of the distances, but not the square, which was incorrect. But this is in the official record. Someone made this mistake before. So, the fact that we can take the average to actually compute this thing we wanted to minimize as part of the overall cost function is the reason this Llyoid algorithm works so well and is so kind of is clever, that every time I take one of these two steps, either the assignment or the average, I'm decreasing the overall cost. Okay, so the key insight is both 1A, which is the assignment, and 1B, the average, they both decrease cost 2 of XS. right? So both of the steps I'm iterating between are decreasing the cost function, which I'm trying to optimize in my k-means formulation. What this implies is if the cost cannot increase in any step, then I cannot get stuck in a loop where I'm coming back to the same location. I'm always decreasing. And that means this iteration will be finite and it will terminate eventually, right? The implication of this is that Llyoyd's algo will terminate, will stop. Okay, so I've solved the halting problem. Not in general, but just for this algorithm, right? It will terminate eventually. Do we have a bound on how many steps until it will terminate? Usually 20. But in theory, people have come up with examples where it will be exponential in the number of points. Okay, the number of steps it can take. These are really strange examples that you can construct, but you can construct them. So there's really no real hard bound on how long it takes to run Llyoyd's algorithm. I mean, there is one, but it's exponential in the number of, at least in the number of clusters. I think in the number of points too. In practice, it runs pretty quickly, but in theory, it might run a really long time. Yeah.
So for the next step, to explicitly calculate, compare those so that they equal to the HA, but then we try to minimize the cost.
Yeah. So
it's not exactly HA.
Well, if I look at the overall cost function, right, I can write the overall cost function, cost 2 of xs. I can write this as sum over x, sum over s, j, and s. And so I can now write it as the x minus sj squared if phi of s x equals j, right? Otherwise, I assign it for 0, okay? And so I can also write it as sum over s in s, all the sites x in xj, only look at the ones that are being summed here. Right, so I can write the sum, I can either break it down sum over these, and then the assignment step is choosing the assignment to minimize this part, right? And the centering step is minimizing this term by choosing where this goes. So it's still the same overall cost function. So this overall cost function is always decreasing, no matter if I'm redoing the assignment step or I'm redoing the averaging step. Okay, so yeah, this is, you have to write out this to kind of totally formalize the argument. Okay, makes sense now? Great. Okay, good. So, okay, so this is Llyoyd's algorithm. It's very, I want to say one more thing about Llyoyd's algorithm. Let's look at this situation with k equals 3. And I'm going to put S1 here, S2 here, and S3 here. What's going to happen to the algorithm? What's Llyoyd's algorithm going to do? Let's draw the Voronoi diagram. Okay, Voronoi diagram looks something like this, right? Okay, so what do? I'm going to move S3 here, S1 here, S2 here, redraw the Voronoi diagram. Looks like this. Okay, so now what happens? It stops. It stops here. Is this the best solution? No, there's a better solution if I group them this way, right? This is the blue is better, but the orange terminates. Okay, so the Llyoid algorithm terminates at the orange solution, but it is not the optimal solution. Okay, so this happens. This happens all the time. You know, it's not all the time. Most of the time, it works pretty well, but it's not unusual for this to happen. And as k gets bigger, this is kind of more and more likely to get stuck in some suboptimal solution where you get stuck with two sites stuck into one group, and one site is kind of splitting the difference between another pair, and it doesn't know how to fix it, right? It's like one of those these AI algorithms. They know what to optimize or they know what to do, but it doesn't know that it's wrong. It says, I'm done. This is pretty good. This is a local optimum. So Lloyd's algorithm can get stuck in local optimum. Okay, so Lloyd's can get stuck in local optimum. Okay, so it's not perfect. Okay, so it's very popular, you know, but it doesn't always find the right solution. Okay, so what should we do? This is not the end of the story. Okay, I want to look back at this algorithm again for Lloyd's algorithm here. There was, in particular, let's look at step 0 here. This step 0 was to choose my initial set of k arbitrarily, and that arbitrary choice is what got me into trouble here. I chose S1 and S2 on the same cluster here. If I had chosen this blue centers, well, it's basically done. It's going to find the global optimum. So I just chose the wrong starting point. Okay, so what should I do? Choose another set of random points. Very, very good. So how to initialize Llyods. Okay. Okay, random restart with S drawn from X at random. Okay, great. So I can re-choose a set of points S at random from the data. This does not always work either. Okay, so let's say I've got, this was up until when I was in grad school or so, this was the approach that everyone said you should use. This was kind of what I learned until effectively a peer of mine came up with another algorithm. So let's say there's a big group down here and 1 point way off here. It's an outlier, but I want to find the right solution for this. If I pick random points, they're always going to be down here. But I want to pick this outlier. Well, maybe I'll sometimes pick that eventually, but what if there are 2 outliers? I should really, and k is 3, I really need to pick both of these and a point down here. Imagine they're even further apart, right? So just at random, I'll almost never, there's some setups will almost never get the right solution. Okay.
Choose the first point at random for that. Make sure it's at least some set distance away from every other point.
How would I do that? Euclidean what? Remember back an hour back in time. What were we talking about? You're almost there. What were we talking about for? What was the first item we talked about in this lecture? The Gonzalez algorithm. Great. The Gonzalez algorithm. Okay, if I ran Gonzalez algorithm on this point set, it will work. I pick an arbitrary point here, then I'll pick S2 here and probably S3 here. And these are the right centers. Now I can optimize this point to here, and if there are even small sets of points, it will optimize them. In this example, it will give me the right answer. Okay? It won't always give the right answer, though. It kind of works, but not always. And it's deterministic. So I can't like run it over again. Can maybe start with another randomized starting point, but I even with the different randomized starting point, it won't always work here. The problem is that it's deterministic. You can come up with, in fact, plenty of situations where starting with any initial point of Gonzalez and running the algorithm will not give you the right starting point to optimize. Okay. So we're running low on time, so I'll kind of jump to this, but there's an approach called k-means plus plus. C++ was really cool back then. Okay, so we started adding plus pluses onto stuff. I had a friend in college who wrote on a CV for a job fair. He knew C, C+, and C++. He figured he could interpolate between the two, but was not advice I will give as well. For okay, k-means plus plus kind of does it kind of interpolate between these two random restarts and Gonzalez algorithm. It kind of randomly picks points that are far away from points I've already chosen. And this is kind of the agreed upon way to initialize k-means plus the Llyoyd's algorithm. And usually you do a few random initializations and take the best outcome. Okay, so if you run it inside of Python, whatever, they initialize with k-means plus plus, they iterate to a solution, and then they restart and do it a few times. And this is now the accepted solution built into all the packages. Okay, so how does this work? K means I can't turn off this is fine. Yesterday he called me. I'm halfway home. I have a sprained ankle. Can you pick me up? I'm like, nope. You'll make it. Keep going. You're almost there. Okay. So the step 0, I initialize S1 as any point in X. Okay. So as an element, as one of the points in X, this is arbitrarily. Then I have a for k equals 2 to n. Then I'm going to choose Sj from X proportional to phi of Sj minus 1 of X times X, this distance squared. Okay, so I'm going to choose a point proportional to the squared distance. So it's not going to be uniform. The further a point is away from the set of existing clusters, the more likely I'm going to pick it. In fact, I'm going to pick it proportional to the squared distance because what I want to do is minimize some of the squared distances. If I was initializing for k-median clustering and algorithm for that, I would pick proportional just to the regular distance, not the square, right? But I'm picking proportional to the squared distance, right? So if I have a set of points here, and I have a lot of points here and a few points here, and this is my initial S1, well, there are a lot of points that are close. There are many points, so I might pick one point that's close, but these points are very long. And in fact, I care about the squared distance. So even though there are only a few points, I'm much more likely to pick one that's further away. And if there are more and more points over here in this cluster than this one, then I'm more likely to pick a center here. So I'm going to tend to pick in regions that are far away from everything else, proportional to the squared distance. And if there are more points there, Well, the total cost will be more affected by choosing a point in that region. So I'll tend to pick one of those representative points. And so this is the k-means plus initialization. And this, you can say some guarantees, like you can get like a log n factor approximation if you repeat this enough times on average. So it will tend to give you the right sort of distribution. And this was kind of the first provable algorithm for k-means plus. And since then, people have optimized it, but it's just theoretical stuff. This is a practically very useful thing that's now built into kind of any package you use for k-means clustering. Okay, great. So we'll stop here. Again, I'm not here next week. I won't have my office hours. There will be guest lectures in here. They will not be recording their lectures. So you should probably come to class. We'll post all the notes and stuff, which are already online. All right.